The first thing I heard was metal screaming against metal too close, too fast. My boots slipped on the wet platform as I turned, just in time to see the fog tier open like paper. Something huge was cutting through it. No lights, no horn, no warning. The ground shook, the rails vibrated under my feet, and for a second, I thought it was going to rip the station in half. I stepped back, heart pounding, my hand already on the small of my back where the cold steel weighted. The shape kept coming, silent except for the hiss of air brakes that never fully caught. I counted the shadows rushing past, then lost count. Before I regret saying any of this, hit that like button. Subscribe if this is already making you uncomfortable. And tell me what city you're watching from, and what time it is, Berlin. Occidental, Invierno de 1978. The platform was never meant to be quiet. Even at night, you'd hear the rattle of incoming freight, the shuffle of late passengers, the static hiss from the dispatch booth. That night, there was none of it. Just my own breathing and the faint buzz of a flickering lamp over track 3. I had been told my watch began at 22 o'clock. No train scheduled until 22:45. Nothing to do but stand there, sip the coffee I'd bought from a machine that probably hadn't been cleaned since the wall went up, and keep an eye on the fog rolling in from the east. 5 minutes in, I felt the vibration. It started in the soles of my boots, a deep hum more than a sound. I turned toward the source, expecting to see a headlight beam cutting through the mist. Instead, the fog swallowed everything. No glow, no horn, nothing. The rails trembled harder, like something was gliding over them at speed dot when it emerged. I thought for a second I was imagining it. A convoy long, dark, unmarked. No cabin light in the engine, no numbers on the cars, no brake sparks. Just a smooth, uninterrupted motion. It didn't slow down for the curve, didn't acknowledge the platform, didn't exist on any timetable. I'd seen. Instinct kicked in. I stepped closer to the edge, counting the cars. 1, 2, 7. The fog blurred the rest. I tried to make out shapes through the slit's vents, maybe, but the speed and the mist made it impossible. By the time the last car passed, my coffee was cold in my hand, untouched. I turned toward the dispatch booth. The glass was dark. No operator. The door was locked from the inside, which meant whoever was supposed to be there either left in a hurry or didn't want to be found. I tried the radio clipped to my belt-only static. The rails stopped humming. The night swallowed the silence. Again, for a long moment, I stayed where I was, waiting for someone to step out from the shadows to tell me what the hell I'd just seen. No one did. By 22:50, the scheduled passenger train arrived. Lights blazing, brakes squealing, the driver leaning out to wave like nothing was out of the ordinary. Passengers stepped onto the platform, chatting, carrying bags, not even glancing at me. I scanned their faces, looking for any sign they'd noticed. Nothing. I thought about writing a report on the spot, but I knew better. Unscheduled sightings went nowhere unless you had something solid, and even then, they had a way of disappearing from the files. Instead, I memorized every detail I could: the number of vents on the lead car, the chipped paint on the third, the faint smell of diesel, and something metallic in the air. When the platform cleared, I took one last look at the empty tracks. Fog was lifting, revealing nothing but steel rails stretching into the night. It should have been the end of it. I could have gone home, chalked it up to fatigue, maybe even convinced myself it was just a late freight running dark. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something on the ground, wedged between the wooden planks and the edge of the concrete. A torn strip of paper, wet from the mist. I pulled it free carefully. It had Soviet lettering, smudged, but still legible enough to read 2 words. Do not touch. That should have been the end of it. But the sound of distant rails humming again stopped me cold. 2 days before that night, the chatter had already started low, casual, the kind of rumor you only catch when people think. You're not listening. A freight conductor in the canteen swore he'd seen a train slip through Checkpoint East without a single signal or customs stop. Another claimed the control board in Spandau registered a spike in rail voltage with no corresponding entry on the schedule. Normally, I'd file that under bar gossip. But the thing about bar gossip in Berlin back then, half of it came from people who had clearance levels higher than mine that the official channels were quiet. Too quiet. Every inquiry I made about unscheduled rail movements was met with the same polite shrug. Nothing unusual to report. The words were neat, rehearsed, like they'd been told to say them. Even the guys in signal maintenance, who would usually trade a story for a cigarette, had nothing eyes darting away, changing the subject. I decided to check the incident logs myself. The archive room smelled of dust and damp cardboard. The files stacked in metal drawers that screamed when you opened them. Page after page of routine entries, delays, mechanical faults, minor vandalism until the dates lined up with the alleged sighting. Then, nothing. A gap. Not a blank page, not a no incidents to report, just missing sheets. Ripped out. The first person who admitted anything was an old yard supervisor named Kruger. I caught him smoking by the loading bays, leaning against a boxcar tagged for Dresden. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "You ever seen a train run without a number?" he asked. I told him no. "Then you don't want to." He flicked his cigarette into the snow and walked away without another word. That night, in my flat, I went over the city's freight maps. My coffee table was buried under paper-colored lines for passenger routes, dotted for freight, bold for international connections. I traced every plausible path a train could take from the Soviet sectors into West German territory without triggering a checkpoint. None existed, not on paper, not unless you believed in phantom rails or invisible trains. The next morning, the rumor had grown teeth. Someone claimed the convoy came from as far as Kaliningrad, slipping across borders as if the rules didn't exist. Another swore it carried no cargo, at least, nothing you could list on a manifest. Inventory, they called it, the way a bureaucrat might talk about machine parts. By the third day, even the mechanics were whispering. "No engine noise," one said. "Runs like it's floating." Another swore it left no residue on the T. Rails, no grease, no rust flakes, no oil. That was impossible. Even the cleanest wheels leave a trace. I filed my own note into my personal ledger, a habit from the early days, back when I still thought I could keep my own records safe. 3 words. Convoy without origin. I didn't know then how literal that was. Later that afternoon, I received my first anonymous phone call of the year. A man's voice, distorted, said only, "If you see it, don't follow. It's not going where you think." Then the line went dead. Back then, I thought maybe it was a scare tactic, a joke from someone who knew I was looking. Now I'm not so sure. That should have been the end of the rumors. But the envelope in my mailbox the next day said otherwise. The envelope was unmarked, heavier than it looked. No stamp, no return address. Just a rough string tied around it, frayed like it had been handled more times than I cared to count. I knew immediately it wasn't from the usual channels. No bureaucracy, no protocol, just something passed hand to hand under the radar. My contact was a man named Vogel, a face I'd trusted through too many gray nights to count. He met me in a shadowed corner of an abandoned warehouse near Tempelhof, his eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. He handed me the envelope without a word, eyes flicking around as if someone might be watching. I didn't open it then. That wasn't how this worked. Back in my flat, under the dim glow of a single lamp. I peeled the string carefully and unfolded the contents. A railway map, old and dog-eared, with one simple line drawn in thick ink starting from Kaliningrad, cutting through territories like a needle through fabric, ending at the border of the Federal Republic of Germany. No stops, no sidings, just one straight, unbroken line. Alongside it, a short note in typed Cyrillic, the kind used in official documents, but unsigned. The words were chillingly direct. Track the line. The rest is unspoken. I stared at the map, tracing the route with my finger. It crossed zones marked restricted and off-limits, places where even our most seasoned agents moved like ghosts. It passed through checkpoints, supposedly sealed shut, bypassing radar and patrols in a way that defied logic. This was no ordinary intelligence gathering. It was a task that hinted at secrets buried deep, beyond what even I had been briefed on. Vogel's look said it all. No questions. Just follow. I packed my gear that night. A worn leather coat, my service pistol, a compact radio tuned to a channel no one was supposed to listen to, and the map folded in my inside pocket. The weight of it all settled on my shoulders heavier than the winter coat I wore. Out, there was a train that shouldn't exist, on tracks that shouldn't be used, carrying a cargo that wasn't meant to cross borders. And I was the one they'd chosen to find out why. That should have been the end of my choice. But the real journey was just beginning. The train whistle was long gone, but the image of that silent convoy haunted every step I took toward the eastern border. The cold gnawed through my coat as I crossed into the shadowland zones where maps were sketches and trust was a luxury you couldn't afford. The station I was heading to looked abandoned, forgotten by time and men alike. Rust crawled over the signs, the benches sagged under layers of frost, and the air was thick with a silence that wasn't natural. I found the old guard shack near the tracks, half buried in snow. An elderly man named Heinrich emerged, his eyes sharp despite the years. His voice was low when he spoke. "This isn't a train," he said. "It's an inventory. People, not cargo." The weight of his words settled in the air between us like smoke. He warned me to keep my distance and to forget what I thought I knew about borders and treaties. You won't find answers in maps or reports. You'll find only questions, and they're dangerous. His gaze lingered, as if he was weighing whether I'd survive what I was about to discover. That night, under a sky starless and indifferent, I watched the rails, knowing the phantom train could come again bringing with it truths no one wanted unearthed. That should have been the end of the warnings. But it was only the beginning. The old station was nothing more than a forgotten relic board sagging, windows boarded up, a relic swallowed by time and snow. Yet beneath its rotting floors lay secrets that no official report ever hinted at. I found the entrance to the loading tunnels just behind the freight sheds, a rusted hatch half hidden beneath a tattered tarp. The cold metal sent a shiver through my fingers as I pulled it open, revealing a staircase descending into damp darkness. The air down there was thick with moisture and something else, an acrid, metallic tang that made my nose wrinkle. The faint echo of dripping water mixed with the creak of ancient beams, reminding me this place hadn't seen a living soul in years. Or so I thought. Flashlight in hand, I moved cautiously along the narrow passage. The walls were slick with condensation, and the faint glow revealed peeling paint and faded Soviet markings on the pipes overhead. My boots made little noise against the concrete floor, but every step felt like trespassing into a grave. Deeper inside, I found a junction where the main tunnel connected to a secondary track 1, absent from all the maps I had studied. It ran parallel to the official line, but vanished into a thick curtain of shadows. I could almost feel the weight of the secrets pressing in, suffocating yet undeniable. The air grew colder, and my breath came out in short, misty bursts. Suddenly, A faint mechanical hum vibrated through the walls, subtle but persistent. I stopped, straining to listen, my heart rate picking up despite myself. It wasn't the hum of a train. It was something else, something alive and deliberate. The silence returned quickly, and I pressed forward until I reached a sealed door, rusted shut but unmistakable. A faded emblem once proudly Soviet was nearly scraped off the metal beneath, worn smooth by time or intention. I traced the outline with my fingers, a shiver running through me. This wasn't just a tunnel. It was a vault that should have been the end of the descent. But the sounds coming from behind that door said otherwise. The secondary track ran straight into a chamber that looked more like a bunker than part of a railway system. The ceiling arched low, reinforced with riveted steel plates, the kind used to withstand more than just the weight of earth above. My flashlight beam cut across stacks of rotting wooden pallets in tarpaulin-covered shapes. I didn't dare uncover. At the far end sat a single rail spur, and on it a solitary wagon. Black, heavy, its surface dulled by grime and time. No windows. No markings except for the faint outline of where the Soviet emblem had once been, before someone had scraped it down to bare metal. My eyes followed the weld lines along its side, perfect, seamless, deliberate. It wasn't built for cargo you'd stack or store. This was built to keep whatever was inside from getting out. The only openings were narrow vents, 4 on each side, high enough that you'd need a ladder to peer through. They were too small for a human hand, but just wide enough for air and sound. I climbed onto a crate to get closer. The metal around the vents was warm. That was wrong. In the middle of this frozen underground, something inside was radiating heat. I listened. Nothing at first, just the faint hum of the ventilation system. Then, a scrape, slow, deliberate, like something or someone shifting their weight against a metal wall. I froze, every instinct telling me to move, to back away, but I stayed, ears straining for more. Another scrape, followed by 3 soft, measured knocks. Not random. A pattern. The sound was enough to break my concentration. I dropped down from the crate, my boots hitting the concrete with a hollow thud that seemed far too loud. My flashlight caught on a streak along the wagon's base-dried residue, rusty red against the black paint. That's when I noticed the lock. It wasn't a standard freight seal. It was a military-grade security latch, the kind that required both a coded key and an override lever to open. No civilian yard would have the tools for it, which meant whoever had placed this here didn't intend for it to be moved or opened without very specific authorization. Still, the ground told a different story. Fresh marks on the rails polished where wheels had recently run. This wagon had been moved, not just once. Recently, I started photographing details vents, lock, scrape marks, my small camera's shutter muffled by the damp air. Each click felt like another nail in the coffin of plausible deniability. If anyone caught me here, there'd be no explaining my way out. Before leaving, I stepped back for one last look. The dim beam of my flashlight caught something etched near the bottom corner of the wagon's side, a number hand-carved into the paint. 4 digits, 1972. The year meant nothing to me in that moment, but I filed it away. The scrape came again, louder this time. Then the 3 knocks repeated. And then silence. That should have been the end of my inspection. But the radio on my belt crackled to life with a sound I wasn't supposed to hear down here. The static was faint at first, just the usual background hiss you get underground, but then it sharpened into burst-short, clipped tones. I froze, pulling the radio from my belt and pressing it to my ear. It wasn't voice. It was Morse. The sequence came slowly, with pauses that didn't fit standard transmissions. 3 dots, a pause, 2 dashes, then silence. The rhythm was uneven, almost hesitant. I wrote it down on the back of my notebook, each mark smudging. Under my thumb as the damp air softened the paper, I switched to a second frequency, one reserved for field coordination. More tones, different sequence. This time, between bursts, I heard it. A hollow clang, as if the sound was traveling through pipes. It matched the knocks from the wagon vents. My eyes went to the black car at the end of the rail spur, that it wasn't a transmission from some distant control tower. It was coming from in there. I scanned the tunnel. No footsteps, no voices, just the cold hum of the underground. Still, my pulse quickened. The knocks changed two short, one long followed by what sounded like a metallic drag, then another. Pause. I tapped my flashlight gently against the vent grill. Once, twice, nothing back. I started decoding the first sequence. The letters didn't form words I knew, but the second one did. Help. Not in Russian. English. I checked my watch. Nearly midnight. No scheduled activity in this sector for another 6 hours, but I knew better than to assume I was alone. I pocketed the notebook, killed the flashlight, and let my eyes adjust to the dark. The vents still gave off that faint warmth, but now I could smell something else wet. Human. Faint, but unmistakable. Another set of tones came through the radio. Shorter this time, almost frantic. The pauses grew shorter too, like whoever was sending them was running out of time or breath. I recognized part of it, a grid coordinate. It wasn't for this station, it was for a location near the border. That was the first moment I realized this wagon wasn't here to stay. It was waiting for the line to clear, for the right moment to move. And when it did, whatever was inside would vanish with it. I switched the radio off, stuffed it deep into my coat, and headed back toward the hatch. My boots echoed too loudly now, each step pushing the air around me into uneasy currents. Halfway up the staircase, the static flared again, louder, harsher. The same pattern repeated over and over until it cut off mid-sequence. Silence. That should have been the end of the signal. But when I reached the surface, someone had already been there, and they'd left me something I didn't want to find. The scrap of paper was tucked under the wiper of my car, folded twice and damp from the night air. No signature, no handwriting, just a typewritten sentence. Drop it. Shadows aren't your business. I read it twice and slid it into my coat pocket without looking around. By the time I got back to headquarters, the corridors felt emptier than usual. Desks unoccupied, typewriters silent, the air thick with that particular stillness you only notice when people have been told to keep their heads down. I went straight to the duty officer with my preliminary notes. He didn't even open the file. Before shaking his head, "Not actionable," he said, voice flat. "You didn't even read it. I don't need to." It was the same line I'd been hearing in whispers for days, only now it was official. The man's eyes flicked to the wall clock, then to the door, as if the conversation was already over. I tried the operations chief next. Same reaction, but colder. He leaned back in his chair, hands clasped. "We can't allocate resources to chasing rumors," he said. "And that's what this is, a rumor. Rumors don't send Morse in English from a sealed wagon." His mouth tightened. "Forget the wagon. Forget the tracks. Write your report, file it under miscellaneous, and move on." The order was clear. I was to leave it alone. But I'd been in the game long enough to recognize the smell of something being buried on purpose. Every time I'd seen this kind of shutdown before, it meant the truth wasn't inconvenient, it was dangerous. I went to my desk, only to find my drawer locked. My keys still fit, but the arrangement inside wasn't mine. My notes from the tunnel, the sketches of the wagon vents, the etched number, the Morse sequences were gone. In their place was a fresh pad of paper, blank except for a single line written across the top sheet. We told you. The next day, my access to certain frequencies was revoked without explanation. The same ones I'd used to intercept the knocks and tones. It wasn't a coincidence. I tried to pull the freight logs again, just to see if the wagon had moved. This time, the entire week's records were missing from the archive. Not misplaced, removed by the third day. It was clear no one was going to help me. Not the local handlers, not the senior officers, not even the people I'd once trusted to give me a quiet heads up when things got ugly. And yet, late that night, I caught myself tracing that single inked line on Vogel's map again from Kaliningrad to the border. My orders were to stand down, but the line didn't care about orders. That should have been the end of my pursuit. But then the platform where I'd first seen the convoy wasn't as empty as it should have been. The platform lights burned brighter than usual, as if someone had decided the night needed exposing. I knew the schedule, nothing was due for another hour, yet there were fresh boot prints in the frost. My hand went instinctively to my coat pocket, fingers brushing the cold grip of the pistol I'd kept hidden there since my first sighting of the Phantom train. I wasn't alone. A patrol unit emerged from the shadows at the far end of the platform 5. Men moving with purpose. Their uniforms were regulation, but their faces weren't familiar. No local guards I'd ever dealt with. The one in front, tall, with a stiff posture, called out in German, not the clipped accent of West Berlin, but something flatter, rehearsed. "Evening, Herr." He paused, and then said my real surname. My real one. The one not on any of my current IDs. Got my blood went cold. That name hadn't been spoken in this city in years. I kept my expression neutral, but my mind was already turning over the possibilities. Either someone inside had given me up, or someone had been tracking me far longer than I realized. The officer approached slowly, his men fanning out to block both ends of the platform. His eyes lingered on the bag, slung over my shoulder. "Expecting a delivery?" he asked. It wasn't a question. I shrugged, playing for time, scanning for exits. The station building was too far, the stairwell to street level blocked. Only the tracks were open, and jumping them with this many eyes watching would have been suicide. He stepped closer, just enough for me to catch the faint scent of tobacco on his coat. "We hear you've been asking about a certain train," he said, voice low now, almost friendly. "That's not wise." Behind him, one of the men raised a hand to his earpiece. A faint vibration began in the rails. I recognized it instantly, the same deep hum I'd felt the night the convoy first appeared. My pulse spiked. The tall officer smiled, not warmly, but like someone humoring a doomed opponent. "You'll stay right here," he said, "until it passes." And that was all I needed to hear. They weren't here to arrest me. They were here to make sure I saw something, or didn't. The hum grew stronger, the fog beginning to curl in from the far end of the line. Somewhere in that white veil, metal was cutting through the night without sound, without light. The Phantom was coming. That should have been the end of my choice. But then the convoy slowed just enough for something to be thrown from a sealed wagon. The patrol held their positions, eyes locked on me as the fog thickened. The hum became a pulse, rattling through the soles of my boots. Then it emerged, black, unlit, moving with that same unnatural glide. The sealed wagons blurred past, their vents exhaling faint streams of warm condensation into the freezing air. The tall officer didn't watch the train. He watched me, as if gauging every flicker of recognition in my face. I forced myself to remain still, to keep my breathing steady. The convoy slowed, not enough to stop, but enough to change the rhythm of its passing. From the third car, a small hatch slid open for barely 2 seconds. Something dark and wrapped in oilcloth dropped onto the platform with a muted thud. One of the patrolmen bent to pick it up, but the officer raised a hand and nodded toward me instead. "Yours," he said simply. I stepped forward slowly, my eyes flicking between the object and the men who just allowed it to be handed over. The oilcloth was slick, cold, and heavier than it looked. I kept my grip tight, resisting the urge to open it there and then. The officer's smirk widened just a fraction. "Now you've seen enough," he said. The convoy didn't speed up immediately. It drifted forward, almost as if waiting for confirmation. The last wagon passed, its scraped-off emblem flashing briefly in the dim light. Then the fog swallowed it whole. The patrol didn't leave. They stayed until the hum faded into nothing, the air settling back into silence. Only then did the officer tip his hat in a mock gesture of courtesy. "We won't meet again," he sighed. And just like that, they were gone, vanishing into the mist as if they'd never been there. I carried the package out of the station, every step feeling like a decision I couldn't undo. The streets were empty, the snow crunching under my boots the only sound. I didn't head for my flat. Instead, I found a narrow alley off Friedrichstrasse, shielded from the wind. There, under the yellow glow of a flickering lamp, I knelt, unwrapped the oilcloth. The smell hit first old paper, dust, and something faintly chemical. Inside was a bundle of photographs, each one grainy and monochrome, the edges curled from age. Faces stared back at me, men and women in prison uniforms, their eyes hollow but alert. I knew some of those faces. That should have been the end of it, but the names matched lists I'd seen years before. People officially declared dead. The photographs were a punch to the gut. Grainy as they were, I could still read the numbers stitched to their uniforms. Dates scrawled in the corners told me these weren't recent. Some were from 5, maybe 6 years back. Yet the eyes in those images didn't belong to the dead. I flipped through them one by one. Faces I'd seen in briefing dossiers, in grainy surveillance stills, in funerals where the coffins had been closed. Officially, they were casualties, fell in action, or executed by enemy forces. And yet here they were, standing in front of some kind of plain concrete wall, looking straight into the camera like they'd been told exactly when to blink. One photograph caught me longer than the rest. A man in a worn military jacket, the patch half torn from his shoulder. His file had been on my desk in '75, a captured operative who'd supposedly been traded back in a prisoner swap, only to die within the year from complications. I'd signed the condolence letter myself. Now he was here, unmistakable. Alive, at least at the moment. The shutter had clicked. The backgrounds in the shots told their own story. No barracks, no visible guards, just a high wall with a narrow slit for light. One image had the faint outline of a rail car behind the subject, vents like the ones I'd seen in the sealed wagon underground. Whoever took these photos wanted the link to be clear to those who knew what they were looking at. I noticed the chemical smell again, stronger now that the oilcloth was off. It clung to the paper, the kind used in photographic development, fresh enough that it couldn't have been sitting for decades. Whoever dropped this package wanted me to know these people weren't relics, they were current inventory. I counted 23 faces in total. Each one had a name I could place in an old file. Each one was supposed to be beyond reach, either buried in state cemeteries or erased entirely from record. My stomach tightened. There was no note, no message. Just the faces. It was both a warning and an invitation. Whoever had orchestrated this drop knew I wouldn't let it go. They were counting on it. I slid the photographs back into the oilcloth, tightening the wrap against the cold air. My mind was already moving ahead. Who had access to this kind of evidence? Who could move it across borders? And who would risk letting me see it? I had no answers. But as I started walking, the weight, in my coat felt heavier than paper. These weren't just images, they were leverage. The kind that could crack alliances if put in the wrong hands. Or the right ones. That should have been the end of my shock. But the last photograph changed everything. The last photograph was bent at the corner like it had been handled more than the others. I smoothed it out with my thumb, and for a second, the cold around me seemed to disappear. The face staring back wasn't just familiar. It was personal. His name was Daniel Hart. Field operative. Western Sector. Partnered with me for 6 months in 71 Berlin. We'd run extractions, dead drops, even a couple of false flag stings together. He'd been steady, sharp, the kind of man who could melt into a crowd or talk his way out of a checkpoint with nothing but a smile. In 1972, he vanished. No body, no funeral, no trace. The official word was presumed killed in an ambush during transit. I didn't believe it then, but I never found proof otherwise. Until now. In the photograph, Hart wore the same prison garb as the others. His hair was longer, streaked with gray, but the eyes, they hadn't changed. Still that same calculated calm, like he was already thinking 3 moves ahead. Only this time, the set of his jaw was different. Defiant, almost smug. Behind him, partially out of frame, was the edge of a wagon door, the same design I'd seen underground. Vents cut high, paint scraped where the emblem had been. A faint shadow overlapped his shoulder, the shape of someone else standing just beyond view. I stared at that picture longer than I should have. Questions came fast. Had Hart been taken against his will? Had he defected? Or worse, had he been working for them all along, embedded deep enough to fool even the people who vouched for him? One thing gnawed at me. If the train was moving prisoners, long thought dead, someone on our side had to be clearing the tracks. The convoy didn't just appear. It was allowed to appear. Hart's presence suggested more than survival. It suggested cooperation. I slipped the photograph into my inside pocket, separate from the rest. Whoever had given me this package wanted me to see him last. They knew the effect it would have. They knew it would keep me from walking away. That night, I didn't go home. I walked the streets until dawn, replaying every operation we'd run together, looking for cracks I'd missed. By the time the sun broke over the rooftops, I had no answers, just a certainty that this wasn't about a ghost train anymore. It was about betrayal. That should have been the end of the trail. But I knew exactly which door I had to knock on next. The door I knocked on that morning never opened. Not fully. Just enough for a single eye to watch me from the dark, and then the quiet scrape of a bolt sliding shut. I didn't blame them. By then, the photographs were no longer in my coat. They were hidden where no one without a death wish would look. For days after, I caught the hum of rails in places where no tracks ran. Sometimes I thought I saw Hart's face in crowds, never long enough to be sure. I stopped checking the official channels. They'd already decided this story didn't exist. Winter bled into spring. The fog lifted, the nights shortened, and the station where it began went back to being just another platform. But I still hear those 3 knocks, slow and deliberate, in the quiet hours. And I know one day the train will come back. If you made it this far, maybe you were meant to hear this. Subscribe if you want to know what else never made it to the files. And tell me in the comments, did you already know about any of this? Or did I just ruin your sleep?